It's a Champions League evening. Miguel Delaney of the London Independent is with us. Evening.
Evening from London, if not Bucharest or Madrid.
Ah, dear. What channel will you watch on over there? BT?
BT, yeah. That's the standard for it.
Is it available on ITV this weather?
No, it's not. I don't even think they have highlights anymore.
Wow.
It's all, which is a shame given I actually had to do something today on United's game with Barcelona in '94, the home game. And one of the reasons I absolutely love the Champions League is having grown up with all those games feeling like massive events on terrestrial television. And it is a complaint we've seen in England a little bit, where, I remember doing a piece about 2 years ago about what Champions League's become, all these great comebacks, and I got a lot of responses saying, yeah, it's just a pity a lot of us can't watch it properly or have to go to a pub because BT is quite expensive, and a lot of people don't justify it. I'm not sure that numbers are actually that high, which is remarkable, really.
Yeah, it's a pity. I mean, our childhood was Bill and the Three Lads, and it was RTE every night, and obviously TV3 have then come in, now Virgin, but it's still, a pretty good deal for Irish viewers, and the Manchester United 90s odyssey was just a part of the landscape. I mean, it's a kind of sad thing to think that the next generation didn't see Mbappe and Haaland announce themselves last week. That's
exactly it. It doesn't have the same kind of, I suppose, mass effect on the public consciousness as it did back then. You're right. I just associate those days with United's holy grail and kind of long nights to soul in European football before they finally cracked it. And I suppose we're not quite getting this. And even actually, if you go back a decade ago, I mean, Mbappe's performance last Tuesday felt a little bit like Messi's 4 against Arsenal in 2009-10. And there were, I suppose, similar stages of career. Messi had been kind of like arguably one of the greatest player of the year for 2 years, but it felt like that was the night where he went on to another level, the kind of quality of the goals and the way he ripped Arsenal apart. And it felt similar with Mbappe, but the audience is obviously much smaller.
Yeah. You were writing about this game this evening through the prism of Luis Suarez, always an interesting character. He starts up front for Atletico this evening. And you were making the point on the London Independent website, and people can check the piece out, that Suarez is a mental technique he uses to ensure he's at his most frenetic for these big games. And you said that the Uruguayan focuses on perceived injustices or previous controversies to rile himself, so he's at his rampaging maximum. So, for instance, Chelsea, you said, well, there's that defeat, the slip from Steven Gerrard in May 2014. I was like, yeah, I get how that would be a nice source of motivation. And then secondly, Chelsea were also the opposition for one of the biggest controversies of his career when he bit Ivanovic. And that is a sentence that still reads remarkably. It sure does. And I'm wondering, how does Suarez feel like he was the victim in the Suarez biting Ivanovic saga?
Well, I mean, I suppose it's, so the way he presented it, apparently, and he has written about this in his book, actually, it obviously wasn't the biting, like he's accepted he was wrong there. And to be fair, he's actually quite mature when he talks about it, given the absolute immaturity and oddness of the act.
Yeah.
But what he talks about is the way he felt in England after a pariah. Like he makes specific mention of David Cameron calling him an appalling example, and plays it all up as if the reaction was absurd and he was public enemy number one. And that's the sort of thing he gets into his head. And like when I was talking to people about it, like I was speaking to someone who used to work with Suarez on a daily basis, so I knew him quite well, and talking about kind of the way he goes through all this. But what it immediately reminded me of was Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, where he would, I suppose there were so many stories in that where Jordan is talking about some, a perceived insult he's had that never actually happened, but it just serves his focus in that moment. And there really seems a lot of that with Suarez. And what someone said to me, who has worked with Suarez and a fair few top players, was that, the line was that a lot of great players, yes, they have that iron mentality, but it's still their talent that governs that. Like the talent is the main basis. Whereas with Suarez, it's basically, it's almost the will that's more influential than the talent. And as I wrote in the piece, that almost feels symbolic in the way he actually plays. I mean, one of the images I always associate him with Liverpool, maybe it's not so much these days because he's changed his game, but when he used to get on the ball, just put his head down and kind of almost burrow his way through defences, like as if he was taking no for an answer, or he wasn't taking no for an answer and was just looking to get through that gap no matter what.
It was a very striking dribbling technique in that there wasn't a huge amount of technique, but it worked too often for it not to be very deliberate and consistent in its own weird way. But I mean, it would like he'd almost knock it against the player, and then it would come back against his shin and bumble through the player's legs, and you thought, well, how is he, as you said, almost just charged his way through there? But it just kept happening.
Yeah. Well, exactly, and I suppose let's not overlook it either. It's because there was that element of erratic chaos about it, but also his ability to react quicker than people and pretty amazing control. I mean, there was some seriously distinctive goals in that regard. Like, I mean, the one I think that always stands out for me, even though it's not necessarily his most spectacular goal, but the way he took it on the chest against Newcastle that time is just, it's almost unique as I feel like I can't think of too many goals like that or too many moments in football like it. And that's what he's capable of producing. And it's, the danger for Chelsea tonight in that Atletico, I mean, this has been a long-running thing with them in their quest for the Champions League. They've never necessarily been the best attacking side. It's usually been defence-based and they're hard to break down. But he just gives them that ingenuity and the possibility of something out of nothing that they've really lacked.
You made the point as well in your piece, some around Liverpool, you've obviously been talking to different sources around Suarez, some around Liverpool even genuinely felt that his 2013-14 form was a kind of bizarre sense of, quote, personal revenge, end quote, towards Brendan Rodgers for not letting him leave the previous summer. And this jumped out to me because in that pre-season, Off the Ball ran a competition for listeners to go over and play on the Anfield pitch, and then get to see a training session afterwards, So it wasn't like a big media presence. But, sorry, actually, people weren't there. I'm confusing too. I was over to interview Brendan Rodgers. That's what it was. I was suddenly thinking, why weren't all the competition winners with me in the stadium? So anyway, waiting to interview Brendan Rodgers after a Liverpool training session, they were training on the pitch at Anfield, but there was not it was an empty stadium. I was one of less than a handful of people watching. And Suarez was acting out. I mean, this was around the time, this was just after Arsenal came in with the 50 million and £1 bid and, all that was going on. And Suarez was acting out. Like, it was so dramatic. He was just booting balls away. He wasn't really paying attention. He wasn't doing the drills he should have done. And, like, it was extraordinary to kind of witness it, If I had any sense, I would have been streaming the whole thing before being promptly kicked out of the stadium. But that's why your line jumped out at me. Like, you wouldn't have watched that session and thought, geez, he's a happy camper here. But then he went on and had this angrily brilliant season. And so that's why when you had that quote from somebody saying, like, almost it was a sense of personal revenge against Brendan Rodgers, even though, like, it makes sense and it doesn't make sense, I really think that person is onto something, whoever that source is.
It's just basically, it's him kind of clinging on to whatever he does, and I'll show you. Or even, I mean, who knows what way his mind works in that regard. But even in the sense, I'll play myself out of this club. Because to be fair, I mean, one thing that should be said about all that was Steven Gerrard played a pretty influential role, and that was him that kind of made the penny drop for Suarez. And he told him, look, why are you wasting, I mean, with no disrespect to Arsenal, but I suppose it's true given what they became around that period. His argument, why are you wasting your great talent by going to Arsenal and kind of rushing a move where you have another great season here and the two Spanish who you really want to go to, they'll act.
Yeah.
And that's precisely what happened. And I suppose, again, if that was the kind of element of personal revenge, he'll play his way out of the club. Well, it spectacularly worked.
It sure did. And in fairness, he was amazing then for a few years thereafter. And this season again, 16 league goals. Generally, the sense you got from people around Suarez, a well-liked teammate?
Well, this is it. And I mean, because let's be fair, if you look at the rap sheet from his career, would obviously, and as I mentioned in the piece, above anything else, what is probably the most ugly recent incident in recent English football history, bar probably John Terry and Anton Ferdinand, which was the getting found guilty for racial abuse of Patrice Evra. And when you look at stuff like that and the bite, I mean, that is a really unpleasant rap sheet. It's just, it doesn't paint a good picture of someone at all, and right down to a racial incident, which is the ultimate negative, especially given the way the discussion around all that has developed over the past few years. And yet, when you talk to people around Suarez or former teammates, it's impossible to find anyone to find a bad word anyone that would say a bad word about him, which is basically why the Liverpool players backed him in what now seems one of the most ill-advised decisions in the recent history of the club. But he's just seen as a kind of a likable guy, but someone who is just completely different on the pitch to his actual personality because of that ultra competitiveness. And it is a little bit hard to square the two when people talk about that. And I don't want the piece to be a defensive of him or to paint what he's like as a positive, given that. But that's the picture that's built from talking to people around him.
This is an interesting game tonight for a whole host of reasons. Chelsea topped Group E. Obviously, this was Frank Lampard's Chelsea who topped Group E ahead of Sevilla, and Atletico finished second behind Bayern. We know Chelsea's domestic form, and we know Atletico are top of La Liga. They're 3 points ahead of Real Madrid. They do have a game in hand. However, their most recent form is a touch shaky. A couple of draws in there, just one win in 4. One of the really interesting things about Simeone this season, and I haven't seen much of Atletico, so I'm really looking forward to the game tonight, is that, I mean, the ultimate 4-4-2 Merchant has been mixing things up, often playing a 3-1-4-2. I think tonight it's a 3-4-2-1 with Suarez leading the way. But Simeone is, I mean, I'm sure the DNA is similar, but he's mixing things up a touch, it would seem. Have you seen much of them?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be as aggressive as ever. It's just aggressive in different areas of the pitch, because the main difference, I mean, as I was saying, in all of these Champions League campaigns, and even when they won the league in 2013-14, this was a team that was defence-based and would hit you in the break, but would often mean that they'd draw a few games, kind of 0-0 or 1-0, or not make that breakthrough. Whereas now, because of Suarez, they actually play much closer to the goal, and the whole team has basically shifted 30 yards up the pitch, with a lot of players like Correa and Lamar doing the work that Suarez would have done for Messi. So, I mean, it's an interesting one that regard, as regards Suarez as well. I mean, he's using his rejection from Barcelona as his personal revenge this season. But yet, given what they wanted from him and the direction of the team and his career, Barca were actually probably right to get rid of him, as mad as that sounds. But, I mean, allied to that, I mean, part of his response is also because I was thinking about this doing the piece as well, and it almost warrants a kind of bigger discussion itself. I can't think of two people in terms of a player and manager relationship as suited to each other in terms of their outlook, or at least in terms of kind of how they draw on aggression and defiance and resilience, as Suarez and Simeone. I mean, you've probably only got similar examples in Keane and Ferguson, you know, Cruyff and Guardiola, Xavi and Guardiola maybe, but there aren't too many to match in terms of this. And Simeone is the perfect manager to bring that out with him. And, you know, Suarez almost seems to personify the Atletico sense of fight in that regard. But in terms of this game also comes at an interesting time. I mean, you mentioned their slight drop-off recently. This game comes at an interesting time as regards, for all the respect we have for Atletico and the almost fear there is about them, they're top of a Spanish league that is suffering real problems in Europe and has led to growing talk about a crisis in Spanish football. And given there's just a series of terrible results, and it'll be interesting to see if the two Madrid clubs can arrest that tonight and tomorrow. But it's amazing how it happens, given, you know, still 2 years ago we were talking about Spain always dominating the Europa League. They dominated the Champions League through these three clubs: Atletico Real Madrid, and Barcelona. Whereas now it's as if they've suddenly just fallen off a cliff. And I think it almost is worth investigating the reasons for that, and it's why tonight will be so interesting, because whether you just, you know, a country or a team's aura goes, an opposition side suddenly realise, hang on, we can get at these, which is almost what happened last week in the second half between Paris Saint-Germain and Barcelona. And who knows, it might be similar tonight with Chelsea, because there is a lot of respect from Chelsea towards this Atletico. But let's see how it pans out.
I do want to ask you about Tuchel and what you've made of him, but just some breaking news, if you'll allow me, Miguel. Tiger Woods has been taken to hospital. He's been injured in a single car crash near Los Angeles, according to LA County Sheriffs. Emergency personnel extricated Woods from the vehicle using the jaws of life. He's been taken to a local hospital for his injuries, and his condition is unknown at this time. So that is some breaking news. Tiger Woods injured in a single car crash near Los Angeles, according to LA County Sheriffs. Emergency personnel extricated Woods from the vehicle. They had to use the jaws of life to cut him from the vehicle. He's been taken to a local hospital, and his condition is unknown at this time. Obviously, we'll keep you up to date on that. Sorry, Miguel, to spring that on you and segue back into football. That's news just breaking. Yeah, extraordinary. Hopefully everything's okay. So on Tuchel, it's noticeable that Callum HudsonOdoi starts this evening. I'm sure he's kind of going, Thomas, what's the deal here? Do you like me? Do you not like me? So 31 minutes substituted. Jamie Carragher last night making the case that he shouldn't have been substituted. It certainly wasn't his work rate, was the point Carragher made, and he demonstrated with some fairly convincing pictures, I thought. Tuchel, generally, I must say I've been kind of impressed by him.
Yeah, I mean, I've electronically attended a lot of his press conferences now, and I really like him. I think he talks about football brilliantly. To be honest, like, from that regard, he is several levels above Frank Lampard. I mean, without putting too fine a point on it, it's like when you hear Tuchel talk about football and you hear Lampard talk about football, it's actually embarrassing that Chelsea persisted with such a rookie for so long. I know that sounds remarkable, but it's true. Just the way Tuchel can expand on things, he is close to a genius in that regard, which people, which a lot of people who worked with him say. But the flip side of that genius is that he can be histrionic and a bit dramatic. And this incident with Callum HudsonOdoi feels the first indication of that. At the same time, though, I do wonder whether it's a little bit strategic, and he feels HudsonOdoi is one of the players that he can make an example of in this regard, precisely because he's been very specific in how he's brought HudsonOdoi back into the fold. He's given him a role that he didn't have under Sarri or Lampard. And he's almost been kind of like the chosen player so far, playing a really specific role in the team. But so that's why I wouldn't read too much into it, all the more so because HudsonOdoi is back in today. But it's going to be interesting to see how these situations develop.
Yeah, I must say I haven't sat in on all his press conferences clearly, but anytime I hear him talking about football, his answers are incredibly detailed, well thought out. I mean, he's obviously an unbelievably smart, deep thinker in the game, and I would say as well in his even just in his less detailed post-match interviews, there's an authority about him that for some reason didn't jump out at me in the same way when he was at PSG. Maybe because I wasn't watching interviews in English or whatever. But I mean, right from the off, I think he's looked at this and said, "I've got 18 months. I'm just going to do this my way, and frankly, to hell with everyone else." Yeah,
I think so. And just in terms of how he talks about football, I mean, journalists are really guilty a bit too much of reading everything through the prism of press conferences, which is only a size people. But one of the things press conferences do, or what they should be, they obviously shouldn't just be a game where you're trying to get a manager or someone to say something that's a headline or whatever. It should actually be talking about football. And one of the great shames of modern Mourinho, which is why I really liked talking to Tuchel in that regard, is that Mourinho, when he was at his best and when he was relaxed, if you threw a football question at him, like when he was asked to talk about Messi or something like that, he used to be absolutely brilliant, and he'd really break down and he was like, you were getting an education when he talked. We don't really have that some more because Mourinho's obviously using his press conferences for all sorts of other different angles. But with Tuchel, there's a sense of that as well. And again, that wasn't something you saw with Lampard. With Tuchel, you throw something at him, and he's willing to get into it. Like a few weeks ago, ahead of their game against Spurs, we got him talking about his coaching method, which is guided discovery, or the principle, or and the kind of different spectrums within that, whether it's kind of giving players constraints and letting them learn for themselves, or closer to the Guardiola side, which is where it's more prescribed and almost everything is drilled. And he was talking about the different situations and that, and how different players react in a different way, and the way all he tries to do is guide players to a certain point where they have options that they can use their own innovation. And he was fascinating talking about it.
Yeah,
and even the other day, Jacob Steinberg asked him about why German coaching and pressing is at the forefront of the game, and he basically goes, "Unfortunately, we don't have time in this press conference."
Wow. Yeah, really interesting. So this should be a really good game. We'll get a good sense of where Tuchel is, early days with Chelsea. Before you go, just wanted to get your initial thoughts on this. This is kind of breaking news today, so I know you've been otherwise engaged. MTK Football is now a thing. So boxing promoters MTK Global have confirmed a move into the world of football agency. And look, there is money to be made, as we know. No real details regarding clients have been revealed, and to be fair, there's no real detail on what part of the world they're going to focus in on initially. But look, the English game is pretty lucrative, so why not start there? MTK, of course, founded in 2012 by Daniel Kinahan, who has since severed ties with the operation, but recently admitted he's still very much advising boxers and involved in that sport. I'm not sure to what extent he plans on being involved with advising footballers, but I would think, Miguel, post-Panorama, this will be looked at now pretty seriously by football journalists when they get around to it in the next few days.
Oh, yeah, and there's already been, I think, a lot of journalists switching on to this, getting into... I mean, it's interesting, since that Panorama documentary came out, there'd been a lot of murmurs about how they were about to get involved in football, or there were already some links. I suppose discussing the subject, I suppose we always have to be very careful about what we say. But, I mean, football, as the biggest sport in the world, the most universal sport in the world, it's where the most money is. It's pretty natural any agency would look to eventually develop into it. But what's going to be very interesting, I think, is not just about how the UK media, or any media basically, deal with it post-Panorama, but also what the reaction is going to be for any players who sign up to them. I mean, from the early indications and what I've heard, I mean, I think they'll probably concentrate on the UK market more than anything else. But well, you know, it's an interesting one for players as well, because after Panorama, they've got a choice to make there too, and how that's going to be received.
Yes, how it'll be received and how it's going to play out over the next couple of weeks, and we'll be keeping a close eye on it. Miguel Delaney of the London Independent. Enjoy the game. Thanks, Mil.
Cheers. Thanks, Joe. And
our football coverage on Off the Ball is with thanks to Paddy Power. For information on responsible gambling, visit gamblingcare.ie. I mentioned that breaking news. We'll try and bring you more details as we get it. Tiger Woods has been taken to hospital. He's been involved in a single car crash this morning, Tuesday, over in LA. Was cut from the vehicle by the jaws of life. Significant damage to the car, or the Jeep, it would seem. So that's real breaking news at the moment. We're going to try and get someone over in the States after 8 o'clock and bring you more detail on that. But that's the breaking news on Tiger Woods in the last while.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power. Champions League nights on Off the Ball. Bigger than Zlatan's Eco. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.